The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists with a sound that echoed through my suburban neighborhood like a gunshot. My daughter Victoria stood on our front porch, tears streaming down her face, watching as Detective Martinez led me toward the patrol car. "I wish you were never my father!" she screamed, her voice breaking with rage and betrayal. The neighbors had gathered on their porches, cell phones recording every humiliating second of my arrest. But none of them knew what the police had actually discovered in our basement that morning and how everything they thought they understood about Marcus Sullivan was about to change forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in Riverside Heights, Connecticut. I'd been brewing coffee in my kitchen, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across the manicured lawns of our quiet cul-de-sac, when the doorbell rang with an urgency that made my stomach clench. Through the peephole, I saw Detective Martinez and Officer Johnson standing on my doorstep, their expressions grim beneath the brim of their caps. Behind them, two more patrol cars were pulling into my driveway, their red and blue lights painting my white colonial house in flash and colors that screamed trouble to anyone watching. I opened the door slowly, my heart already racing. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" Detective Martinez stepped forward, her badge gleaming in the morning light. "Marcus Sullivan? We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with the theft of medical equipment from Hartford General Hospital." She handed me a folded document that felt heavier than paper should. "We need you to step aside while we conduct our investigation." The words hit me like cold water. Medical equipment theft. I worked as a night security guard at Hartford General, had for the past 3 years since losing my engineering job during the pandemic. It was honest work, quiet work, the kind that let me provide for Victoria while staying invisible in a world that had forgotten men like me existed. "There must be some mistake," I managed, stepping back as officers filed past me into my home. "I've never stolen anything in my life." Martinez's expression remained professionally neutral. "Sir, we received an anonymous tip that stolen hospital equipment is being stored in your basement. We're here to verify that information." Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep. At 17, she carried herself with the confident grace of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Unlike me, she had inherited her mother's natural beauty and sharp intelligence, qualities that had opened doors I could never have imagined at her age. "Dad, what's happening?" Her voice trembled with confusion and growing alarm as she watched uniformed officers spreading through our living room. "Just a misunderstanding, honey," I called up to her, trying to get dressed for school. "This will all be sorted out soon." But Detective Martinez was already heading toward the basement door, and I knew with sinking certainty that my carefully constructed life was about to collapse around me. The basement held secrets I had never intended to keep, equipment I had acquired through channels that existed in the gray areas between legal and necessary. Equipment that had saved lives, even if the bureaucrats at the hospital would never see it that way. 3 months earlier, I had discovered something during my rounds that changed everything. Mrs. Eleanor Hendricks, an elderly woman in the long-term care ward, was slowly dying because the hospital's aging dialysis machine couldn't properly filter her blood. The administration had been promising a replacement for 8 months, but budget constraints kept pushing the purchase to next quarter. Meanwhile, Eleanor grew weaker each day, her family watching helplessly as the system failed her. I had started volunteering in the medical wards during my breaks, partly to feel useful and partly to escape the loneliness that had consumed my life since my wife Sarah died 2 years ago. Watching Eleanor suffer while perfectly good equipment sat unused in storage rooms felt like a crime against humanity. The hospital's waste was staggering. Functioning machines were discarded from minor calibration issues, replaced by newer models that performed the same functions with slightly better efficiency ratings. That's when I began what I privately called my redistribution project. During my security rounds, I would note which equipment was tagged for disposal or sitting forgotten in storage. Medical devices that could save lives were being thrown away while patients suffered and died waiting for bureaucracy to approve purchases. I started taking home the discarded equipment, refurbishing it in my basement workshop, and quietly delivering it to small clinics and elderly patients who couldn't afford proper medical care. My engineering background made the refurbishment possible. Before the pandemic cost me my job at Connecticut Aerospace, I had specialized in precision medical devices. I understood the calibration requirements, the safety protocols, the maintenance schedules that kept these machines functioning at optimal levels. What the hospital considered broken, I could usually repair with a few hours of careful work and some replacement parts ordered online. Victoria knew I spent time in the basement workshop, but she assumed I was tinkering with electronics as a hobby. She had no idea that the dialysis machine humming quietly in the corner was keeping 3 elderly patients alive in their homes, or that the portable oxygen concentrators stacked against the wall were providing round-the-clock care for chronic respiratory patients who couldn't afford the monthly rental fees. Eleanor Hendricks had been my first success story. I'd refurbished the dialysis machine that the hospital had deemed unrepairable and arranged for a private medical technician to install it in her home. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Within weeks, her color improved, her energy returned, and her family stopped discussing hospice care. She lived for 8 more months, long enough to see her granddaughter graduate from college and get married. The work gave my life meaning in ways my security job never could. Every piece of equipment I saved represented a life that might be extended, suffering that might be relieved, a family that wouldn't have to watch their loved one deteriorate while waiting for institutional approval. I wasn't stealing, I was rescuing resources that otherwise be wasted while people died from lack of access. Now, as Detective Martinez descended into my basement workshop, I realized how naive I had been about the legal implications of my actions. The law didn't recognize the distinction between theft and rescue, between waste and property rights. To the system, I was simply a thief who had violated the trust in me as a security guard. "Jesus Christ," I heard Martinez mutter from below. "Johnson, you need to see this." The sound of heavy footsteps on my basement stairs felt like a countdown to disaster. I had installed over 40 pieces of medical equipment down there, from basic blood pressure monitors to sophisticated respiratory assist devices. Each one had a story, a patient whose life had been improved or extended because I had given discarded technology a second chance to serve its intended purpose. Victoria came downstairs dressed for school, her face pale with growing understanding that this was more serious than a simple misunderstanding. "Dad, why are there police officers in our basement?" Before I could answer, Detective Martinez emerged carrying a tablet displaying a long list of medical devices. "Mr.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sullivan, we're going to need you to come down to the station for questioning. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney." The Miranda warning felt surreal, like dialogue from a television show that had accidentally invaded my real life. Around me, officers were photographing equipment, taking notes, treating my workshop like a crime scene instead of a place where compassion had been converted into action. "I can explain everything," I said desperately. "That equipment was being thrown away. It was going to be destroyed while people were dying because they couldn't afford proper medical care." Martinez paused in her recitation of my rights. "Sir, regardless of your intentions, this appears to be a substantial theft operation. The hospital estimates the value of missing equipment at over $200,000. $200,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. I had never thought about the cumulative value of what I'd taken, had never considered the financial impact on the hospital's insurance claims or replacement budgets. In my mind, I had been saving equipment from destruction, not stealing valuable property." Victoria's face went white as the implications sank in. "Dad, did you steal from the hospital?" Her voice cracked with disbelief and dawning horror. "I didn't steal anything, honey. I saved equipment that was going to be thrown away. I fixed it and gave it to people who needed it." But the distinction that seemed so clear to me obviously meant nothing to the 17-year-old daughter who was watching her father being arrested. To Victoria, I had become a criminal, a thief who had violated the trust of his employers and brought shame upon our family. The pride she had always shown in having a father who worked in healthcare, who contributed something meaningful to society, was crumbling before my eyes. "I can't believe this," she whispered, backing away from me like I had become something dangerous. "All this time, I thought you were working late to help people, but you were stealing from the hospital where Mom used to work." The mention of Sarah cut deeper than the handcuffs. My wife had been a nurse at Hartford General before cancer took her 2 years ago. She had dedicated her life to healing, to following proper channels and working within the system to help patients. The irony that I was being arrested for stealing from the place where she had served so faithfully wasn't lost on me. "Victoria, your mother would have understood," I tried to explain as Detective Martinez guided me toward the front door. "She would have seen that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the wrong rules." "Don't you dare bring Mom into this," Victoria shouted, her grief and anger exploding in a way I had never seen before. "Mom followed the rules. Mom was honest. Mom would be ashamed of what you've become." The words shattered something inside me. For 2 years, I had been trying to honor Sarah's memory by continuing her work of helping people, even if I had to do it from the shadows. The idea that she would be ashamed of my efforts to save lives with discarded equipment felt like losing her all over again. As Martinez led me toward the patrol car, neighbors gathered on their porches and driveways, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. The Hendersons from next door, who had always been friendly but distant. The Patels across the street, whose teenage son Victoria had tutored in mathematics. Mrs. Chen from the corner house, who had always complimented my garden and asked about Victoria's college plans. Now they were all watching Marcus Sullivan being arrested, their quiet neighbor revealed as some kind of criminal. Victoria followed us outside, her face streaked with tears and twisted with rage. "I wish you were never my father," she screamed, her voice carrying across the entire neighborhood. "I wish I had never been born into this family." The patrol car door slammed shut behind me with finality that echoed through my chest. Through the window, I watched my daughter standing on our front porch, surrounded by police officers and curious neighbors, looking more alone than any 17-year-old should ever have to feel. In trying to honor her mother's legacy of healing, I had destroyed the only family Victoria had left. The booking process at Hartford Police Station was a blur of fingerprints, photographs, and paperwork. I was assigned a public defender named James Crawford, a tired-looking man in his 50s who carried himself like someone who had seen too many hopeless cases. He reviewed my file with the weary efficiency of someone going through familiar motions. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to be straight with you," Crawford said, settling into the plastic chair across from me in the interview room. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. They found over 40 pieces of stolen medical equipment in your basement, all with serial numbers that match hospital inventory records. The prosecution is going to argue this was an organized theft operation." "It wasn't theft," I insisted for what felt like the 100th time. "That equipment was scheduled for disposal. I saved it from being destroyed and gave it to people who needed medical care they couldn't afford." Crawford rubbed his temples. "I understand your motivations, but the law doesn't distinguish between theft and redistribution. You removed hospital property without authorization. The fact that you intended to help people might mitigate sentencing, but it doesn't change the fundamental charges." The reality of my situation was settling in like cold concrete in my chest. I was facing felony theft charges that could result in years in prison. Even if I received a lenient sentence, my career in healthcare was finished. No hospital would ever trust me with security clearance again. Worse, Victoria would be left to finish high school with the stigma of having a father who was a convicted felon. "What about my daughter?" I asked. "She's 17. She can't live alone." "We'll need to contact relatives or arrange temporary guardianship status," Crawford replied. "Does she have family who could take her in?"
I thought about Sarah's sister Patricia in California, a successful marketing executive who had always made it clear that she considered my blue-collar background beneath her family's standards. Patricia had tolerated me for Sarah's sake, but she had never hidden her belief that her sister had married down. Now she would get confirmation of her worst suspicions about Marcus Sullivan. "My wife's sister might take her," I said quietly. "But Victoria won't want to leave Connecticut. She's got college applications pending, friends, a whole life here." Crawford made notes on his legal pad. "We'll address custody arrangements after we deal with the criminal charges. Right now, I need you to understand that pleading guilty might be your best option. The evidence is overwhelming, and a jury trial would likely result in harsher sentencing." I spent that night in Hartford County Jail, staring at the ceiling and replaying every decision that had led me to this moment. The first time I had taken equipment from the hospital, it had felt like an act of moral courage. A perfectly functional blood glucose monitor was sitting in a storage room while diabetic patients rationed test strips because they couldn't afford new devices. Taking it home to refurbish and donate had felt like common sense, not crime. Each subsequent rescue had reinforced my belief that I was doing important work. The oxygen concentrator that helped a Vietnam veteran breathe through his final months. The wheelchair that gave mobility back to a stroke victim whose insurance wouldn't cover a replacement. The cardiac monitor that let an elderly man stay in his own home instead of moving to expensive assisted living. These weren't faceless theft victims. They were real people whose lives had been improved because I had refused to let bureaucracy triumph over human need. But lying on a narrow jail cot, I began to understand how my actions appeared to everyone else. Victoria saw a father who had lied to her for months while committing felonies. The hospital administration saw a security guard who had violated their trust and stolen valuable property. The police saw a criminal who had operated an organized theft ring from his basement. The neighbors saw a man who had been living a double life while pretending to be respectable. The hearing for my bail application took place the next morning in a courtroom that smelled like disinfectant and despair. I wore an orange jumpsuit that made me feel like the criminal everyone believed I was. Victoria sat in the gallery with Patricia, who had flown in from California overnight. My sister-in-law's expression mixed genuine concern for Victoria with barely concealed disgust at the situation I had created. Judge Rebecca Torres reviewed my file with the neutral efficiency of someone who had seen every variation of human weakness and poor judgment. "Mr. Sullivan, you're charged with felony theft, burglary, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The prosecution argues that you pose a flight risk given the severity of the charges." Crawford stood to present our argument for bail. "Your Honor, Mr. Sullivan has deep ties to the community, no prior criminal record, and a minor daughter who needs his support. He's not a flight risk. These charges stem from misguided attempts to help people, not personal enrichment." District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez rose to present the state's position. "Your Honor, the defendant operated a sophisticated theft operation over several months, stealing property valued at over $200,000. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a deliberate pattern of criminal behavior. We request that bail be denied." Judge Torres considered both arguments before announcing her decision. Bail is set at $50,000. Mr. Sullivan will surrender his passport and submit to electronic monitoring pending trial. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. My savings account contained less than $3,000 after months of buying parts and supplies for my equipment refurbishment projects. The house was mortgaged to its full value, and my security guard salary barely covered monthly expenses. I would remain in jail until trial unless I could find someone willing to risk their financial security on my behalf. Patricia approached the defendant's table after the hearing, her face carefully composed. "Marcus, I need to know what arrangements you want for Victoria. She can come to California with me, but she'll have to change schools and abandon her college applications. I looked at my daughter, who sat silent in the gallery chair, her face a mask of numbness that scared me more than her earlier anger. Victoria had worked incredibly hard to maintain her grades and extracurricular activities while dealing with her mother's death and my emotional distance afterward. The idea of disrupting her senior year because of my criminal behavior felt like another betrayal. "What does Victoria want?" I asked. Patricia glanced at my daughter, then back at me. "She wants to stay in Connecticut and finish school. She's applied to several colleges in the Northeast, and moving would complicate everything." I realized with crushing clarity that my efforts to help others had destroyed my daughter's carefully planned future. Victoria had spent 3 years rebuilding her life after losing her mother, creating stability through academic achievement and college planning. Now she faced the choice between abandoning her dreams to move across the country or staying in Connecticut while her father sat in prison as a convicted felon. "I'll figure something out," I said, though I had no idea what that might be. Victoria shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes. That evening, back in my jail cell, I called Victoria at Patricia's hotel. The conversation was stilted and painful, full of long silences and careful words that avoided the central reality of our situation. "Honey, I want you to know that everything I did was trying to help people who couldn't get medical care any other way." "Dad, I don't want to talk about it," Victoria replied, her voice flat and exhausted. "I just want to finish school and go to college and pretend this never happened. I understand that you're angry with me. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired. I'm tired of having to explain to my friends why my father was arrested. I'm tired of teachers looking at me with pity. I'm tired of feeling ashamed every time someone mentions your name." The pain in her voice was worse than any judge's sentence could be. "Victoria, I love you more than anything in the world."
I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing would have been thinking about how your actions would affect me before you decided to become a criminal. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of understanding how completely I had failed the only person who mattered to me. In trying to honor Sarah's memory by helping others, I had abandoned the most important responsibility she had left me. Taking care of Victoria should have been my only priority, but I had been so focused on my mission to redistribute medical equipment that I had forgotten my primary duty as a father. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of legal meetings, court appearances, and sleepless nights. Crawford worked to negotiate a plea agreement that would minimize my prison time, while I struggled with the decision to accept responsibility for actions I still believed were morally justified. The hospital's insurance company demanded full restitution for the stolen equipment, an amount that would bankrupt me even if I sold everything I owned. Victoria visited once during those 3 weeks, bringing clothes and personal items I had requested. She sat across from me in the visitation room looking like she had aged years in a matter of days. The confident 17-year-old who had bounced down our stairs in pajamas had been replaced by someone who carried herself with the wary caution of someone who had learned that the people she trusted most could destroy her life without warning. "How are your college applications going?" I asked, trying to find safe ground for conversation. "I withdrew them," she said quietly. "I can't afford college now, and I can't use you as a reference for anything." The casual way she delivered this devastating news hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Victoria had dreamed of studying biomedical engineering at Yale or MIT, following in her mother's footsteps, but with the technical background that came from my influence. She had worked summers and weekends to save money for application fees and had spent months crafting essays about her desire to create medical devices that would help underserved populations. "Victoria, you can't give up on college because of what I did." "Actually, I can," she replied with a bitterness that sounded wrong coming from someone so young. "College costs money we don't have. Character references from people who won't be embarrassed to know me. A stable family situation that doesn't involve explaining why my father is a convicted felon."
I wanted to argue, to tell her that Patricia would help with college expenses, that her grades and test scores would earn scholarships, that this situation was temporary and shouldn't derail her entire future. But the words felt hollow, even in my own mind. Victoria was right. My actions had consequences that extended far beyond my own punishment. "I'm sorry," I said, the inadequacy of the words echoing in the sterile visitation room. "I'm so sorry for what I've done to your life." Victoria looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "The worst part is that I understand why you did it. Mom always said you had a good heart, that you wanted to help people. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less." She left without saying goodbye, and I knew with certainty that our relationship would never recover from the damage I had caused. Even if I served my sentence and rebuilt my life, Victoria would always remember that her father had chosen his mission to help strangers over his responsibility to protect her future. 2 days later, Crawford brought news that changed everything. "Marcus, I just received a call from District Attorney Rodriguez. They want to meet with you about cooperation in a larger investigation." "What kind of cooperation?" "Apparently, your case has uncovered some irregularities in the hospital's equipment disposal procedures. They think there might be a larger fraud scheme involving the sale of medical devices that should have been destroyed." I stared at Crawford, trying to process what he was telling me. "Are you saying that the equipment I took wasn't actually being thrown away?" "That's what they're investigating. It seems that Hartford General has been reporting significant losses of medical equipment to their insurance company while simultaneously selling that same equipment to refurbishment companies. Your theft might have accidentally exposed an organized fraud operation worth millions of dollars." The revelation hit me like a lightning bolt. If the hospital had been fraudulently claiming insurance money for equipment they were secretly selling, then my redistribution project had inadvertently interfered with a much larger criminal enterprise. The equipment I thought I was saving from destruction had actually been destined for illegal resale, and my intervention had disrupted the hospital administration's profit scheme. "What does this mean for my case?" I asked. Crawford's expression suggested cautious optimism for the first time since we had met. "If you cooperate with the federal investigation into the hospital's fraud operation, the local charges against you might be significantly reduced or dropped entirely. The FBI is more interested in the $1 million insurance fraud than your $200,000 redistribution project." That afternoon, I met with FBI Special Agent Catherine Mills and District Attorney Rodriguez in a conference room that felt more like a boardroom than an interrogation chamber. Agent Mills was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to unraveling complex financial crimes. "Mr. Sullivan, we've been investigating Hartford General's insurance claims for unusual patterns of equipment loss," Agent Mills explained. "Your case brought our attention to some discrepancies that suggest systematic fraud." She spread photographs across the table showing medical equipment in various warehouse locations. "We believe hospital administrators have been reporting equipment as damaged or obsolete to justify insurance claims, then selling that same equipment to refurbishment companies for profit. The equipment you took was supposed to be part of this scheme." I studied the photographs, recognizing several pieces of equipment I had refurbished in my basement. "Are you telling me that the dialysis machine I thought was broken was actually functional when I took it?" "According to our investigation, most of the equipment you redistributed was in perfect working condition. It was being stored for eventual sale to a company called Medical Resources Unlimited, which resells refurbished devices to developing countries and underinsured clinics." The irony was staggering. I had been stealing equipment to give it to people who needed medical care, not realizing that the hospital was planning to sell that same equipment to companies that would eventually provide it to people who needed medical care. The difference was that the hospital administrators were profiting from the transaction, while I was giving it away for free. "What kind of cooperation are you looking for?" I asked. Agent Mills leaned forward. "We need detailed information about what equipment you took, when you took it, and what condition it was in. We also need you to wear a recording device during conversations with hospital personnel who might be involved in the fraud scheme." Rodriguez added, "In exchange for your cooperation, we're prepared to reduce your charges to misdemeanor theft and recommend probation instead of prison time." The hospital's insurance company has also agreed to waive restitution demands if you help recover their losses from the actual criminals. I looked at Crawford, who nodded encouragingly. This was better than anything we could have hoped for through plea negotiations, but I had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true.
"What about my daughter?" I asked. "How does this affect her situation?" "If you're not convicted of felony charges, there's no reason she can't remain in Connecticut and complete her education," Rodriguez replied. "Your cooperation might also result in a financial reward from the insurance company if we recover significant assets." The possibility of redemption felt almost too overwhelming to process. Instead of spending years in prison as a convicted felon, I might be able to rebuild my relationship with Victoria and help her pursue her college dreams. But first, I had to help the FBI unravel a fraud scheme that made my equipment redistribution look like shoplifting candy bars. Over the next month, I worked with federal investigators to document every piece of equipment I had taken from Hartford General. Each device had been meticulously cataloged in my basement workshop, with notes about its original condition, the refurbishment work I had performed, and the patient who had ultimately received it. What I had thought was a personal hobby had actually created a detailed record of the hospital's fraudulent disposal practices. The recording device felt strange against my chest as I returned to Hartford General for the first time since my arrest. I was meeting with Dr. Harrison Webb, the chief administrator who oversaw equipment procurement and disposal. Agent Mills had coached me on the questions to ask, the reactions to seek, the admissions that would provide evidence of criminal intent. Dr. Webb was a thin man in his 60s who carried himself with the self-important bearing of someone who had spent decades managing institutional budgets. His office overlooked the hospital's main entrance, its walls decorated with awards for administrative excellence and cost containment initiatives. "Marcus, I'm glad you're willing to cooperate with our internal investigation," Dr. Webb said, gesturing for me to sit in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "We need to understand how our security procedures failed so badly." "I appreciate you seeing me, Dr. Webb. I know my actions caused problems for the hospital." "Indeed they did. The insurance company is asking very pointed questions about our equipment security. They want to know how a night security guard was able to remove valuable medical devices without detection." I followed Agent Mills' script, probing for information about the hospital's disposal procedures. "I guess I was confused about which equipment was actually being thrown away. Some of the devices I took seemed to be in perfect working condition." Dr. Webb's expression tightened slightly. "Medical equipment is complex, Marcus. Devices that appear functional to lay people may have calibration issues or safety concerns that require professional evaluation. But the dialysis machine I took worked perfectly after I cleaned the filters and replaced a few sensors. Mrs. Hendricks used it for months without any problems." "That was incredibly dangerous and irresponsible," Dr. Webb snapped. "You had no authority to determine whether medical equipment was safe for patient use. You could have killed someone with your amateur repair work." His reaction seemed disproportionate to my questions, confirming Agent Mills' suspicion that he was hiding something significant. I pressed further, following the FBI's guidance about how to elicit incriminating responses. "I kept detailed records of everything I fixed," I said. "The equipment was all in much better condition than I expected for devices that were scheduled for destruction." "Scheduled for destruction?" Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Who told you that equipment was scheduled for destruction?" I realized I had walked into exactly the trap Agent Mills had hoped for. "I assumed that's what happens to equipment that's removed from service. Where else would it go?" Dr. Webb was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating his response. "Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding about our disposal procedures. Equipment that's removed from active service isn't necessarily destroyed. We have contractual obligations to refurbishment companies that require proper disposal channels." The recording device captured every word as Dr. Webb essentially admitted that the hospital was selling equipment they had reported as destroyed for insurance purposes. Agent Mills had explained that this kind of double dealing was the foundation of their fraud case, and Dr. Webb had just provided evidence of criminal intent. "So the equipment I took was supposed to be sold to refurbishment companies?" I asked. "That's confidential business information," Dr. Webb replied sharply. "But yes, we have agreements with certified companies that handle medical equipment disposal. Your theft interrupted those arrangements and cost the hospital significant revenue." I left Dr. Webb's office with recorded evidence that would help convict him and several other administrators of insurance fraud worth over $3 million. The FBI used my recordings to obtain search warrants for hospital records, which revealed a sophisticated scheme involving fake damage reports, inflated insurance claims, and kickbacks from equipment resellers. Victoria was waiting for me when I returned to Patricia's hotel that evening. She had flown back from California to testify in support of my character during the final plea hearing. Her presence felt like a small miracle, the first sign that our relationship might be salvageable despite everything I had put her through. "Dad, Agent Mills explained what you've been doing with the FBI," Victoria said as we sat in the hotel's quiet lobby. "She said you might avoid prison time because of your cooperation." "It's possible," I replied carefully, "but even if I don't go to prison, I've still lost my job and damaged our family's reputation. Your college plans have been disrupted because of my poor judgment." Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying my face with the same analytical expression she had inherited from her mother.
"Dad, I've been thinking about what Mom would say about all this." The mention of Sarah made my chest tighten with familiar grief. "What do you think she would say?" "I think she would be disappointed that you didn't trust the system to help those patients. But I also think she would understand why you felt like you had to act." I reached across the small table between us, covering Victoria's hand with mine. "I'm sorry I didn't think about how my actions would affect you. I was so focused on helping people that I forgot my most important responsibility was protecting your future." Victoria turned her hand palm up, squeezing my fingers with surprising strength. "Dad, I forgive you. I'm still angry, and I'm still scared about what happens next, but I forgive you." The simple words carried more weight than any judge's sentence or FBI cooperation agreement. Victoria's forgiveness felt like the beginning of a path back to the family we had been before grief and misguided heroism had torn us apart. 3 days later, I stood before Judge Torres for my final sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with an unusual mix of spectators. FBI agents and federal prosecutors occupied the front rows, while hospital administrators sat under heavy security. But what struck me most was the presence of nearly 20 patients and family members who had benefited from the medical equipment I had redistributed. Eleanor Hendricks, now in her 80s but looking healthier than she had in years, sat in the front row with her granddaughter. The Vietnam veteran who had used my refurbished oxygen concentrator was there with his wife. Families whose elderly relatives had received blood pressure monitors, glucose meters, and mobility aids filled several rows, their presence a powerful testament to the human impact of my actions. Crawford presented our final argument to Judge Torres. "Your Honor, Mr. Sullivan's cooperation with federal investigators has resulted in the arrest of 7 hospital administrators involved in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. His actions, while technically illegal, were motivated by compassion for patients who couldn't access necessary medical care." Rodriguez spoke for the prosecution. "The state acknowledges Mr. Sullivan's cooperation and his humanitarian motivations. We recommend the agreed-upon sentence of 1 year probation and community service." But before Judge Torres could respond, something unprecedented happened. Eleanor Hendricks stood slowly and asked permission to address the court. "Your Honor, I know this is unusual, but I need to speak about what this man did for me," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "The hospital told me I needed to wait 8 months for a new dialysis machine. Mr. Sullivan gave me one that worked perfectly for the rest of my life. Without his help, I would have died before my granddaughter's wedding." Other patients began standing, each asking to share their story about how my refurbished equipment had saved their lives or improved their health. Judge Torres allowed each person to speak, creating an impromptu testimonial that lasted over an hour. When the patients finished speaking, Judge Torres addressed me directly. "Mr. Sullivan, your case presents a complex intersection of criminal behavior and humanitarian action. While the court cannot condone theft, even for noble purposes, the evidence suggests that your actions inadvertently exposed a fraud scheme that was stealing from insurance companies and patients alike." She paused, consulting her notes. "Furthermore, the testimony we've heard today demonstrates that your redistribution efforts saved lives and provided medical care to people who had been failed by institutional systems." Judge Torres announced her sentence. "Mr. Sullivan, you are sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service to be performed at free medical clinics serving underserved populations. Additionally, you will receive a commendation from this court for your cooperation in exposing the Hartford General fraud scheme." The courtroom erupted in applause from the patients and their families. Victoria rushed to embrace me, tears streaming down her face. Even Agent Mills was smiling as she shook my hand and congratulated me on the outcome. But the biggest surprise came the next day, when I received a call from the Hartford Community Health Coalition. They offered me a position as Director of Medical Equipment Redistribution, a new program funded by the insurance company's recovery of stolen assets from the hospital fraud scheme. My job would be to legally coordinate the donation of surplus medical equipment to clinics and patients who couldn't afford proper health care. Victoria was accepted to Yale University with a full scholarship funded by the same insurance recovery program. Her essay about learning the difference between legal and ethical behavior through her father's case apparently impressed the admissions committee. The celebration lasted exactly 48 hours. Then the real consequences of my actions began unfolding like a slow-motion avalanche that buried everything I thought I had salvaged. Victoria hugged me outside the courthouse, her tears mixing relief with lingering hurt. But when we returned to our house in Riverside Heights, the full scope of the damage became impossible to ignore. Yellow police tape still fluttered from our front porch railings, and neighbors crossed the street rather than make eye contact with the man who had brought federal investigators to their quiet suburban paradise. Inside our home, the basement workshop looked like a crime scene that had been abandoned mid-investigation. Chalk outlines marked where equipment had been removed, evidence tags littered the floor, and holes in the drywall showed where officers had searched for hidden devices. The space where I had spent months carefully refurbishing medical equipment now resembled a ransacked storage facility, its purpose transformed from sanctuary to reminder of how quickly a life could be dismantled by good intentions gone wrong. Victoria stood in the doorway of the basement, surveying the destruction with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Dad, how long were you doing this? Really?" I joined her at the top of the stairs, looking down at the remnants of my secret life. "About 18 months. It started small, just a blood pressure monitor that was going to be thrown away. But once I realized how much functional equipment the hospital was wasting, it became something bigger." "You lied to me for 18 months." Her voice carried no anger, just a flatness that worried me more than screaming would have. "Every time you came home late, every time you said you were working overtime, every time you disappeared into the basement for hours, you were lying." The accusation hit precisely because it was accurate. I had become expert at crafting explanations for my absences, at hiding the true purpose of my basement activities, at maintaining the fiction that Marcus Sullivan was nothing more than a simple night security guard who tinkered with electronics as a hobby. The deception had been so comprehensive that I had almost convinced myself it wasn't really lying, just protecting Victoria from complications she didn't need to understand. "I thought I was protecting you," I said weakly. "From what? From knowing that my father was helping people? From understanding that the system doesn't always work the way it's supposed to?" Victoria turned to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears.
"Dad, you taught me to value honesty above everything else. You said that trust was the foundation of any relationship. But you spent a year and a half proving that you didn't trust me with the truth about who you really were." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at our front door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 30s holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of serious expression that suggested official business. Behind her stood a man with a camera and recording equipment. I opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Mr. Sullivan, I'm Janet Morrison from Channel 8 News. We're doing a follow-up story on the Hartford General Medical Equipment scandal. Would you be willing to provide an interview about your role in exposing the fraud? The presence of television cameras on my doorstep felt surreal. Throughout the legal proceedings, I had focused so intently on avoiding prison that I hadn't considered how my story would be perceived by the broader public. Now, a news crew was treating me like some kind of whistleblower hero, when I knew the truth was far more complicated and morally ambiguous. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied. Morrison pressed forward with the persistence of someone accustomed to reluctant subjects. Mr. Sullivan, the public has a right to know how one man's conscience led to the discovery of a $3 million fraud scheme. Your story could inspire others to speak out against institutional corruption. Victoria appeared beside me in the doorway, her face immediately recognizable to anyone who had followed the news coverage of my case. Morrison's eyes lit up with professional excitement at the prospect of interviewing the daughter whose life had been disrupted by her father's criminal altruism. Miss Sullivan, how do you feel about your father's actions? Do you consider him a hero or a criminal? Victoria stiffened at the invasive question. I consider him my father, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave our family alone. But Morrison wasn't deterred by Victoria's obvious discomfort. The public is fascinated by this story. A single father working as a night security guard, risking everything to provide medical care for people who couldn't afford it. It's like something out of a movie. It's not a movie, Victoria snapped. It's our life, and it's been completely destroyed by all this attention. We just want to be left alone. I closed the door firmly, but Morrison's voice carried through the wood. Mr. Sullivan, we'll be back. This story is too important to ignore. Through our front window, I watched the news crew set up equipment on our sidewalk, interviewing neighbors about their reactions to learning that Marcus Sullivan had been operating a medical equipment redistribution center in his basement. Mrs. Chen from the corner house spoke animatedly to Morrison's camera, probably sharing her shock and disappointment about the criminal who had been living undetected in their peaceful neighborhood. The phone began ringing almost immediately. Local newspapers wanted interviews, radio stations requested call-in appearances, a literary agent left a voicemail about potential book deals. Even a producer from a cable television network expressed interest in developing my story into a documentary series. Victoria watched me delete voice message after voice message, her expression growing more frustrated with each reporter's pitch. Dad, maybe you should do one interview. Tell your side of the story so people understand what really happened. I don't want to be famous for this, Victoria. I just want our lives to go back to normal. Normal? Victoria laughed bitterly. Dad, normal ended the day the police showed up at our door. Everyone in town knows who we are now. Everyone has an opinion about what you did. Pretending it didn't happen won't make the attention go away. She was right, of course. The story had taken on a life of its own, growing beyond the facts into something that reflected whatever the audience wanted to see. To some people, I was a modern Robin Hood who had stolen from a corrupt hospital to help poor patients. To others, I was a criminal who had violated the trust of his employers and endangered patients with amateur medical repairs. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more complex than either narrative suggested. The next morning brought a new crisis. Victoria found an envelope slipped under our front door containing photographs of her walking to school, sitting in the library, talking with friends in the cafeteria. No note, no explanation, just a dozen candid shots that proved someone had been following and documenting her daily activities. Dad, I'm scared, Victoria said, spreading the photographs across our kitchen table. Who would do this? What do they want? I examined the pictures with growing alarm. They had been taken with a telephoto lens from considerable distance, suggesting professional equipment and serious stalking behavior. Whoever had taken them knew Victoria's schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. We need to call the police, I said, reaching for the phone. Wait, Victoria grabbed my arm. What if this is connected to the hospital fraud case? What if someone thinks you know more than you've told the FBI? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made terrible sense. My cooperation with federal investigators had helped convict 7 hospital administrators and uncovered a fraud scheme worth millions of dollars. If there were other people involved who hadn't been caught, they might view Victoria as leverage to ensure my continued silence. Agent Mills took the photograph seriously when I called her.
She arrived at our house within an hour, accompanied by a forensic specialist who dusted the envelope for fingerprints and examined the pictures for identifying details. "Mr. Sullivan, we suspected there might be retaliation attempts," Mills said as her colleague worked. "The Hartford General fraud scheme involved some dangerous people who lost significant money when we shut down their operation." "What kind of dangerous people?" "The equipment reselling operation had connections to organized crime. Medical devices are a lucrative black market, especially in developing countries with limited healthcare infrastructure. Your cooperation helped us seize assets worth over $15 million. Victoria went pale at Mills' explanation. "So these people think Dad owes them $15 million? "They think your father's cooperation cost them $15 million, Mills corrected. "Which makes both of you potential targets for intimidation or worse. The FBI arranged for protective surveillance of our house and Victoria's school. But the knowledge that we were being watched by both federal agents and potential criminals created an atmosphere of constant tension." Victoria began looking over her shoulder during her walk to school, jumping at unexpected sounds, checking locks multiple times before going to bed. Meanwhile, the media attention intensified rather than diminishing. Morrison's Channel 8 story had been picked up by national news networks, transforming my local legal case into a symbol of broader healthcare system failures. Talk show hosts debated whether I was a hero or a criminal. Medical ethics professors used my case as an example in their lectures. Patient advocacy groups held me up as an example of grassroots healthcare activism. The attention brought unexpected visitors to our door. A representative from a major pharmaceutical company offered me a consulting position, helping them identify opportunities for charitable medical equipment donations. A nonprofit organization wanted to hire me as a spokesperson for healthcare access reform. Several politicians requested meetings to discuss legislation inspired by my case. Most significantly, Yale University's biomedical engineering department invited Victoria to participate in a special summer program for students interested in medical device innovation. The program would provide hands-on experience with the kind of equipment I had been refurbishing, supervised by professors who understood the technical and ethical complexities of medical technology. "I don't know if I want to do it," Victoria told me as we sat in our kitchen reviewing the Yale invitation. "Everything I do now feels connected to your case. I can't just be Victoria Sullivan anymore. I'm the daughter of the medical equipment thief who exposed hospital fraud." "You're right that your identity has been affected by my actions," I acknowledged. "But you're also someone who has a genuine interest in biomedical engineering and the intelligence to succeed in that field. Don't let my mistakes limit your possibilities." Victoria studied the Yale program description with the same careful attention she had inherited from her mother. The program focuses on developing low-cost medical devices for underserved populations. It's like they designed it specifically for someone with my background. Maybe they did. Maybe something positive can come from all this damage I've caused. But before Victoria could make a decision about the Yale program, our precarious stability was shattered again. This time, the threat came from an unexpected direction that forced us to confront the ongoing consequences of my actions in ways we hadn't anticipated. The fire started in our basement at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. I woke to the acrid smell of burning plastic and the persistent beeping of smoke detectors throughout the house. By the time I reached Victoria's room, she was already awake and coughing from the smoke that was seeping through our heating vents. "Dad, what's happening?" she asked, pulling on a robe over her pajamas. "Fire in the basement. We need to get out now." The Riverside Heights Fire Department arrived within minutes, their trucks filling our quiet cul-de-sac with flashing lights and urgent activity. Chief Robert Walsh, a man I had known casually from neighborhood barbecues and school events, directed his crew with the professional efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. Victoria and I stood on our front lawn wrapped in emergency blankets, watching firefighters battle the blaze that was consuming my former workshop. The same basement where I had carefully refurbished medical equipment was now producing toxic smoke from burning electronics and melting plastic components. "Any idea how this started, Marcus?" Chief Walsh asked as his crew brought the fire under control. I haven't been in the basement since the police investigation, I replied. There shouldn't have been any electrical equipment running down there. Walsh's expression suggested professional skepticism. Fire marshal will investigate, but the burn patterns look suspicious. Accelerant was probably used. The implication was clear. Someone had deliberately set fire to our basement, targeting the space where my illegal activities had taken place. Whether this was connected to the threatening photographs Victoria had received or represented a separate form of retaliation, the message was unmistakable. Our family remained vulnerable to people who wanted to punish me for my cooperation with federal agents. Agent Mills arrived while the fire department was still working, her presence confirming that the FBI considered this incident connected to the ongoing investigation. She spoke privately with Chief Walsh before approaching Victoria and me. Mr. Sullivan, we're treating this as arson related to your federal testimony, Mills said quietly. We're recommending immediate relocation to a safe house until we can identify the responsible parties. Victoria looked at me with an expression that mixed fear with exhaustion. Dad, we can't keep living like this. I can't go to school, I can't have friends over, I can't make any plans because we never know when something else is going to happen. I know, honey. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. Victoria's voice carried a sharpness I had never heard before. Sorry doesn't make it safe for me to live in my own house. Sorry doesn't give me back the normal teenage life you destroyed when you decided to become a vigilante. The federal safe house was a nondescript ranch home in a suburb 40 miles from Riverside Heights. It had the sterile functionality of a place designed for temporary occupation by people whose lives had been disrupted by circumstances beyond their control. Government-issued furniture, basic appliances, and windows covered with security film that prevented anyone from seeing inside. Victoria adapted to our new living situation with the same resilience she had shown throughout the ordeal. But I could see the psychological toll it was taking.
She had been forced to withdraw from her high school in the middle of her senior year, completing her coursework through online programs that isolated her from classmates and teachers who had been important parts of her support system. I should be at prom planning meetings, she said one afternoon as we sat in the safe house's generic living room. I should be stressing about college applications and graduation speeches and which dress to wear to senior events. Instead, I'm hiding from criminals who want to hurt us because of something you did. Victoria, I understand that you're angry with me. You have every right to be. I'm not angry anymore, Dad. I'm just tired of my life being defined by your choices. She closed her laptop where she had been working on an AP chemistry assignment. The Yale summer program starts in 6 weeks. I've decided I'm going to accept their offer. I think that's a good decision. You need to start building your own life, independent of all this chaos. Victoria looked at me with an expression that seemed older than her 17 years. Dad, I love you. I forgive you for what you did, and I understand why you thought it was the right thing. But I can't keep living in the shadow of your consequences. I need to be Victoria Sullivan, not the daughter of the medical equipment thief. I understand. I don't think you do. Victoria's voice carried a finality that made my chest tighten. When I go to Yale for the summer program, I'm not coming back to Connecticut. Aunt Patricia has agreed to let me live with her in California and finish high school there. I'm going to apply to colleges on the West Coast and build a life that doesn't revolve around federal investigations and safe houses and people who want to hurt us. The announcement hit me like a physical blow. I had known that my actions would have consequences, but I hadn't fully comprehended that those consequences might include losing my daughter permanently. Victoria wasn't just going away to college, she was choosing to escape the ongoing disruption that my choices had brought to her life. Victoria, please don't make this decision based on fear. The FBI will catch whoever is threatening us. Things will go back to normal eventually. Normal doesn't exist for us anymore, Dad. And maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe I need to discover who I am when I'm not defined by being your daughter, or Mom's daughter, or the victim of circumstances I couldn't control. Agent Mills provided regular updates on the investigation into the arson and stalking incidents, but progress was slow. The people responsible were professionals who understood how to avoid leaving evidence that could be traced back to them. Meanwhile, the media attention continued, with new articles and interviews appearing regularly about the Marcus Sullivan case and its implications for healthcare reform. I received a letter from Mrs. Eleanor Hendricks, the elderly woman whose life had been extended by the dialysis machine I had refurbished. She wrote to thank me again for my help and to express her concern about the violence my family was experiencing. Her words carried the weight of someone who understood the complex relationship between doing good and causing harm. "Dear Marcus," her letter began, "I have been following the news about your situation with great concern. When you gave me that dialysis machine, you saved my life and gave me 8 precious months with my family. But I never wanted my life to be saved at the cost of your daughter's safety and happiness. Please know that the people you helped understand the price you and Victoria are paying for your kindness." The letter continued with news about other patients who had benefited from my redistributed equipment. Most were doing well, living independently with the medical support I had provided. But several families had contacted Mrs. Hendricks to express their guilt about accepting equipment that had ultimately led to our family's persecution. "We all feel responsible for what has happened to you," Mrs. Hendricks wrote. "We accepted your help gratefully, but we didn't consider that there might be consequences for your family. If we had known that helping us would put Victoria in danger, we would have found another way to manage our medical needs." The unintended impact of my actions continued expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Victoria's high school classmates were being questioned by federal investigators about any suspicious behavior they might have observed around our house. Neighbors were installing security systems and avoiding evening walks because the presence of organized crime in Riverside Heights had shattered their sense of safety. Even my former colleagues at Hartford General were experiencing consequences from my whistleblowing cooperation. The hospital's insurance premiums had increased dramatically following the fraud convictions, leading to budget cuts that eliminated several nursing positions and reduced patient services. The equipment I had thought I was saving from waste would have generated revenue that supported hospital operations, and its loss was creating ripple effects throughout the healthcare system. Dr. Webb and 6 other administrators had been sentenced to federal prison terms ranging from 3 to 8 years, but their families remained in the community, dealing with the stigma and financial hardship that accompanied their loved ones' convictions. Their children attended the same schools as Victoria's classmates, creating social dynamics that complicated everyone's ability to move forward from the scandal. The complexity of consequences became even more apparent when I received a visit from David Chen, the former hospital administrator who had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His wife brought him to the safe house during a temporary release for medical treatment, hoping to have a conversation that might provide closure for both our families. Chen was a thin man in his early 50s who had lost considerable weight during his months in federal custody. His wife, Margaret, was a nurse at a different hospital who had stood by her husband despite his criminal conviction. Both carried themselves with the defeated posture of people whose lives had been permanently altered by circumstances they couldn't control. "Mr. Sullivan, I wanted to speak with you before I returned to prison," Chen said, as we sat in the safe house's small dining room. "I need you to understand that my involvement in the equipment fraud wasn't motivated by greed." I had expected him to be angry with me for the cooperation that had helped convict him, but his tone suggested something different. Regret, perhaps, or a desire for understanding that transcended our roles as whistleblower and criminal. "I'm listening," I said. Chen's wife held his hand as he explained the financial pressures that had led to his participation in the fraud scheme. Margaret was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 3 years ago. Her treatment costs exceeded our insurance coverage by thousands of dollars every month. When Dr. Webb approached me about the equipment reselling arrangement, I saw it as a way to help my wife while still serving the hospital's interests. "I understand that you were trying to help your family," I replied carefully, "but patients were being denied access to equipment they needed while you were profiting from its resale."
"That's what I didn't understand until it was too late," Chen continued. "I convinced myself that we were finding more efficient ways to distribute medical resources. I told myself that selling equipment to refurbishment companies was better than destroying it, even if the paperwork wasn't completely accurate." Margaret Chen spoke for the first time. "Mr. Sullivan, my husband made terrible choices, but he's not a bad man.
He was trying to save my life the same way you were trying to save the lives of those patients who received your refurbished equipment. The parallel she drew was uncomfortable but accurate. Both Chen and I had broken laws and violated trust in service of what we believed were higher moral imperatives. The difference was that his actions had enriched himself while mine had enriched others, but the fundamental dynamic of choosing personal judgment over institutional authority was identical. "Mrs. Chen, I'm not judging your husband's motivations," I said. "I'm just sorry that the investigation of my actions led to consequences for your family." "We're not here for apologies," Chen replied. "We're here because Margaret received threats similar to the ones your daughter experienced. Someone blames us for the collapse of the equipment reselling operation, and they want revenge against everyone who contributed to their financial losses." Agent Mills joined our conversation to discuss the security implications of Chen's information. According to her investigation, the medical equipment fraud had been connected to a larger criminal enterprise that smuggled refurbished devices to countries with limited healthcare regulation. My theft of equipment and Chen's cooperation with federal prosecutors had disrupted a revenue stream worth millions of dollars annually. "The organization we're dealing with has a history of retaliating against people who interfere with their operations," Mills explained. "Your family and the Chen family are both considered responsible for their losses, which makes you ongoing targets until we can arrest the people giving orders." Victoria listened to this explanation with the weary acceptance of someone who had learned to expect bad news as a regular part of life. "So we're not safe until you catch criminals we've never met who blame us for something we didn't know we were doing?" "That's an accurate summary of the situation," Mills acknowledged. The meeting with the Chen family reinforced Victoria's decision to leave Connecticut for her own protection and emotional well-being. If our situation was connected to a larger criminal enterprise with the resources and motivation for long-term retaliation, then staying in the area would only perpetuate our vulnerability. "Dad, I need you to accept that I'm leaving," Victoria said after the Chens departed. "I can't keep living in fear, and I can't keep watching you blame yourself for consequences that were impossible to predict." "I understand why you need to go," I replied. "I just wish there was a way to protect you that didn't require splitting up our family. We can still be a family, even if we live in different states. But I need to be somewhere I can build my own identity without constantly being reminded of this situation." The arrangements for Victoria's departure unfolded quickly once the decision was made. Aunt Patricia flew to Connecticut to help with the logistics of transferring Victoria's school records and preparing for her enrollment in a California high school. Agent Mills coordinated with FBI offices in Los Angeles to ensure that appropriate security measures would be in place during Victoria's transition to her new life. The hardest part was watching Victoria pack her belongings while knowing that she was taking more than clothes and books. She was carrying away her childhood, her connection to her mother's memory, her shared history with the father who had tried to do good but had instead brought chaos into their lives. "I want you to know that I'm proud of what you were trying to accomplish," Victoria said as we loaded her suitcases into Patricia's rental car. "You helped people who had been abandoned by the system. You gave them hope and medical care when no one else would. That matters, even if the consequences have been terrible." "Thank you for saying that, honey. It means everything to me. But Dad, I also need you to promise me that you'll find a legal way to help people from now on. No more taking things that don't belong to you, even if you're planning to give them away. No more lying to protect me from complications I'm strong enough to handle. I promise." Victoria hugged me tightly, and I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. "I love you, Dad. I always will. But I need to go find out who Victoria Sullivan is when she's not defined by being your daughter or Mom's daughter or the victim of circumstances beyond her control." Watching their car disappear down the street felt like losing Sarah all over again, but with the added weight of knowing that this separation was the direct result of my choices. Victoria wasn't being taken from me by disease or accident. She was choosing to leave because staying had become too dangerous and emotionally exhausting. Agent Mills found me sitting alone in the empty safe house that evening, staring at the generic walls that had temporarily sheltered the remnants of my family. "Mr. Sullivan, I have some updates on the investigation that might interest you. Have you arrested the people responsible for the threats?" "Not yet, but we've identified the organization behind the retaliation attempts. More importantly, we've discovered that your cooperation has had implications beyond the Hartford General case." Mills explained that information I had provided about medical equipment serial numbers had helped federal investigators trace stolen devices to a network of hospitals and clinics across multiple states. The equipment theft operation was much larger than anyone had initially realized, involving healthcare institutions throughout New England and generating illegal revenue that funded other criminal activities. Your inadvertent interference with their operation has cost them an estimated $50 million in lost revenue over the past year, but it's also helped us build cases against a criminal organization that was using healthcare fraud to fund drug trafficking and money laundering operations. The scope of what my simple theft had uncovered was staggering. What had begun as my personal mission to help individual patients had accidentally exposed a criminal enterprise that was systematically stealing from the healthcare system while patients suffered and died waiting for equipment that was being sold on the black market. Are you telling me that the equipment I thought I was saving from destruction was actually funding organized crime? That's exactly what I'm telling you. The hospital administrators we convicted were middle management criminals. The real operation was much larger and more sophisticated than we initially understood. Mills opened a folder containing photographs and documents that illustrated the scope of the criminal enterprise. Warehouses full of stolen medical equipment. Financial records showing millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims. Transportation networks that moved devices from American hospitals to buyers in countries with limited healthcare regulation. Mr. Sullivan, your cooperation has helped us identify and arrest over 30 people in this operation. We've recovered stolen property worth more than $20 million and prevented future thefts that would have cost the healthcare system hundreds of millions more. The information should have felt vindicating, but instead it only deepened my sense of responsibility for the chaos that had engulfed our lives. If I had simply reported my concerns about equipment waste through proper channels, none of this would have happened. Are you telling me that the equipment I thought I was saving from destruction was actually funding organized crime? That's exactly what I'm telling you. The hospital administrators we convicted were middle management criminals. The real operation was much larger and more sophisticated than we initially understood. Mills opened a folder containing photographs and documents that illustrated the scope of the criminal enterprise. Warehouses full of stolen medical equipment. Financial records showing millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims. Transportation networks that moved devices from American hospitals to buyers in countries with limited healthcare regulation. Mr. Sullivan, your cooperation has helped us identify and arrest over 30 people in this operation. We've recovered stolen property worth more than $20 million and prevented future thefts that would have cost the healthcare system hundreds of millions more. The information should have felt vindicating, but instead it only deepened my sense of responsibility for the chaos that had engulfed our lives. If I had simply reported my concerns about equipment waste through proper channels, none of this would have happened. Victoria would still be living at home, planning for prom and graduation instead of starting over in a new state because her father had accidentally declared war on organized crime. When will it be safe for Victoria to come home? Mill's expression suggested that this wasn't a question with a simple answer. Mr. Sullivan, the people we're dealing with have long memories and significant resources. Even after we make arrests, there may be others who view your family as ongoing threats to their operations. So, Victoria may never be able to come home safely? That's a possibility we have to consider. I'm sorry. The conversation with Mills forced me to confront the reality that my actions had permanently altered the trajectory of Victoria's life in ways that couldn't be undone by arrests or convictions. She would always be the daughter of Marcus Sullivan, the man whose theft of medical equipment had accidentally exposed a criminal organization. That identity would follow her regardless of where she lived or what she accomplished. 3 weeks after Victoria left for California, I received my first letter from her new school.
She had enrolled in advanced placement courses that would prepare her for the biomedical engineering program at Stanford University. Her grades remained excellent despite the disruption to her education, and she had joined the robotics club and volunteer organization that provided technical support for disabled students. "Dad," her letter began, "I want you to know that I'm doing well here. Aunt Patricia has been wonderful, and starting over has been easier than I expected. I think I needed the distance from everything that happened to remember who I was before our lives got so complicated." She wrote about new friends who knew nothing about medical equipment theft or federal investigations. Teachers who evaluated her based on her academic performance rather than her family's criminal notoriety. Opportunities to explore interests and activities without constantly being reminded of the chaos that had defined her recent life. "I've been thinking about what you taught me about helping people who need medical care," Victoria continued. "The Stanford Biomedical Engineering program focuses on developing low-cost devices for underserved populations, which feels like a way to honor both your intentions and Mom's memory. Maybe I can find legal ways to accomplish what you were trying to do illegally." Her letter included news that she had been accepted into Stanford's early admission program with a full scholarship funded by a foundation that supported students interested in humanitarian technology development. The same insurance company that had recovered stolen assets from the medical equipment fraud had established the scholarship as part of their commitment to supporting ethical healthcare innovation. "It's ironic," Victoria wrote, "that the money stolen from insurance companies through medical equipment fraud is now funding my education in medical equipment design. Maybe something good can come from all the damage that was done." Reading her letter in the sterile safety of the federal safe house, I felt a complex mixture of pride and loss. Victoria was building exactly the kind of life her mother and I had dreamed for her, pursuing education and career opportunities that would let her make meaningful contributions to healthcare. But she was doing it 3,000 miles away from the father who had taught her to care about people who couldn't access proper medical treatment. The final resolution to our situation came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Hendricks, the elderly woman whose life had been extended by my refurbished dialysis machine, contacted Agent Mills with information that broke the case wide open. During her months of extended life, Eleanor had maintained detailed records of her medical care, including serial numbers and maintenance logs for the equipment I had provided. Those records proved that the medical devices in my redistribution network had been functioning perfectly, contradicting hospital reports that claimed the same equipment had been damaged or obsolete when reported to insurance companies. Eleanor's documentation provided the missing link that connected individual pieces of equipment to specific fraudulent insurance claims. "Mrs. Hendricks kept better records than most hospitals," Mills explained during her final briefing at the safe house. "Her documentation helped us prove that the equipment you redistributed was not only functional, but had been deliberately mislabeled to justify fraudulent insurance claims." The evidence Eleanor provided led to additional arrests that dismantled the criminal organization responsible for threatening Victoria and the Chen family. The investigation expanded to medical equipment fraud operations in 12 states, resulting in convictions that recovered over $100 million in stolen assets. "Mr. Sullivan, this investigation has become one of the largest healthcare fraud cases in federal history," Mills continued. "Your accidental interference with their operation led to the discovery of systematic theft that was costing the healthcare system hundreds of millions of dollars annually. More importantly for my family's immediate situation, the arrests eliminated the organized crime connections that had made Victoria a target for retaliation. The people responsible for the arson and stalking incidents were now in federal custody, and their criminal organization had been effectively dismantled." "Is it safe for Victoria to come home?" Mills nodded. "The immediate threats to your family have been neutralized. However, you should be aware that your cooperation with this investigation has made you a valuable witness in ongoing cases. You may be called to testify in trials that could continue for several years." The prospect of ongoing legal proceedings was daunting, but it also represented an opportunity to ensure that the criminal organization responsible for stealing from patients and healthcare institutions faced complete justice. My accidental discovery of their operation had created an obligation to see the legal process through to its conclusion. I called Victoria that evening to share the news about the arrests and the lifting of security restrictions.
Her response was characteristically thoughtful and measured, reflecting the maturity she had developed during months of dealing with circumstances beyond her control. "Dad, I'm glad you're safe and that the people who threatened us have been arrested," she said. "But I want you to understand that I'm staying in California for the rest of high school. Starting over here has been good for me, and I need to finish what I've begun." "I understand, honey. I just wanted you to know that it's safe for you to come home if you want to." "Home isn't really about a place anymore," Victoria replied. "It's about building a life where I can be proud of the choices I make and the person I'm becoming. Right now, that life is in California." Her decision to remain on the West Coast was disappointing, but not surprising. Victoria had discovered that she could be successful and happy independent of the family trauma that had defined her recent years. Returning to Connecticut would mean stepping back into an identity as the daughter of Marcus Sullivan, when she had worked hard to become simply Victoria Sullivan, biomedical engineering student and future innovator. 6 months later, I accepted the position as Director of Medical Equipment Redistribution for the Hartford Community Health Coalition, the job that had been offered as part of the insurance company's asset recovery program. My work involved legally coordinating the donation of surplus medical equipment to clinics and patients who couldn't afford proper health care, accomplishing through official channels what I had previously attempted through theft. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now being paid to do legally what I had once done illegally. The same insurance company that had been defrauded by the hospital equipment scheme was funding a program that accomplished my original goals of providing medical care to underserved populations. The criminal investigation had revealed that there were legal mechanisms for medical equipment redistribution that I had never researched or pursued. Victoria visited during her winter break from Stanford, where she was excelling in her biomedical engineering coursework. At 18, she carried herself with a confidence and independence that reminded me of her mother at the same age. Our relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship between adults rather than the parent-child dynamic that had defined our earlier years. "Dad, I want you to see something," she said, opening her laptop to show me a presentation about her current project. "I'm designing a portable dialysis system that can be manufactured and maintained in developing countries using locally available components." The device she had designed was elegant in its simplicity, incorporating many of the same principles I had applied when refurbishing equipment in my basement workshop. But Victoria's approach was systematic and legal, involving collaboration with medical professionals, regulatory approval, and sustainable manufacturing partnerships. "This is incredible, Victoria."
You're solving the same problems I was trying to address, but in ways that will actually help people long-term. She smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had found meaningful work that aligned with her values. "I learned from watching you that good intentions aren't enough if the methods aren't sustainable. But I also learned that it's worth working hard to help people who have been forgotten by the system." That evening, as Victoria prepared to return to Stanford, she asked me a question that had clearly been on her mind throughout her visit. "Dad, do you regret what you did? Not the consequences or the chaos it caused, but the actual decision to help those patients?" I considered her question carefully, understanding that my answer would influence how she thought about moral courage and practical ethics for the rest of her life. "I regret the methods I chose and the lies I told you," I said finally. "I regret that my actions put you in danger and disrupted your life. But I don't regret trying to help Eleanor Hendricks live long enough to see her granddaughter get married, or giving that Vietnam veteran 8 more months of breathing easily in his own home. I just wish I had been smart enough to find legal ways to accomplish the same goals." Victoria nodded slowly, processing her answer with the analytical mind she had inherited from both her parents. "Dad, I think that's the difference between wisdom and intelligence. Intelligence is knowing how to solve a problem. Wisdom is understanding all the consequences of your solution before you implement it." Her observation stung because it was accurate. I had possessed the technical intelligence to refurbish complex medical equipment and the compassionate motivation to help patients who couldn't afford proper health care. But I had lacked the wisdom to anticipate how my illegal methods would affect the person I loved most in the world. 2 years passed before Victoria and I found a rhythm that worked for both of us.
She excelled at Stanford, earning recognition for innovative research in low-cost medical device design, while I established myself as a respected advocate for ethical medical equipment redistribution. We spoke weekly by phone and exchanged regular emails about our respective work, maintaining a connection that transcended the geographical distance between us. The criminal trials resulting from my cooperation continued sporadically, requiring occasional testimony that kept the Hartford General scandal in local news coverage. But the media attention had shifted from sensationalizing my personal story to examining broader issues of healthcare access and institutional fraud. I was no longer Marcus Sullivan, the medical equipment thief, but rather a witness whose accidental discovery had exposed systematic corruption within the healthcare system. My work with the Hartford Community Health Coalition proved both challenging and rewarding in ways that my previous illegal activities had never been. Instead of working alone in my basement workshop, I collaborated with medical professionals, legal experts, and community health advocates to develop sustainable programs for equipment redistribution. The process was slower and more bureaucratic than my previous methods, but it was also more effective at creating lasting change. We established partnerships with major medical device manufacturers who donated newer equipment when hospitals upgraded their systems. We created training programs that taught community health workers to maintain and calibrate redistributed devices. Most importantly, we developed tracking systems that ensured donated equipment reached patients who truly needed it, while maintaining the documentation required for legal and insurance compliance. The success of our program attracted attention from healthcare policymakers who were looking for ways to address medical access disparities without increase in government spending. Senator Patricia Williams, who chaired the Senate Subcommittee on Healthcare Access, invited me to testify about the potential for equipment redistribution programs to supplement traditional healthcare delivery systems. Mr. Sullivan, your experience suggests that there are significant amounts of functional medical equipment being wasted while patients go without needed care, Senator Williams said during my testimony. What would it take to scale up legal redistribution programs to address this problem systematically? The hearing felt surreal, sitting in a Senate committee room discussing policy solutions that had grown out of my criminal behavior. The same actions that had nearly destroyed my family were now being examined as potential models for national healthcare reform. Senator, the key is creating standardized protocols for equipment evaluation, refurbishment, and distribution that maintain safety standards while reducing bureaucratic barriers. Medical devices don't automatically become worthless when hospitals upgrade to newer models, but we need systems that can identify which equipment is genuinely obsolete and which can be safely redistributed. Senator Williams and her colleagues asked detailed questions about costs, logistics, and regulatory frameworks that would be required to implement equipment redistribution programs at scale. Their interest seemed genuine rather than political, suggesting that my inadvertent exposure of medical equipment waste had identified a problem that policymakers were eager to address. Following my Senate testimony, I received invitations to speak at medical conferences, university seminars, and healthcare policy forums across the country. The speaking engagements provided opportunities to share what I had learned about the intersection of good intentions and effective action, helping others avoid the mistakes that had nearly cost me everything I valued. Victoria attended one of my presentations at a biomedical engineering conference in San Francisco, where I was discussing the technical challenges of refurbishing complex medical devices for reuse in resource-limited settings. Watching her in the audience, I saw the confident young professional she had become, someone who was building exactly the kind of career her mother and I had dreamed for her. After my presentation, Victoria introduced me to her research advisor, Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor who specialized in humanitarian technology development. Dr. Chen had been following her work with interest, particularly the technical protocols we had developed for evaluating and refurbishing donated medical equipment. Mr. Sullivan, I've been incorporating your refurbishment guidelines into our curriculum, Dr. Chen explained. Students need to understand not just how to design new medical devices, but how to maximize the utility of existing technology through proper maintenance and modification. The conversation with Dr. Chen led to an unexpected opportunity. Stanford's biomedical engineering department invited me to serve as a visiting lecturer, teaching courses in medical equipment evaluation and refurbishment techniques. The position would allow me to work closely with Victoria while sharing practical knowledge that complemented the theoretical education students received in traditional engineering programs. "Dad, are you seriously considering moving to California?" Victoria asked as we discussed the Stanford offer over dinner near her campus. "I'm considering it, but only if you're comfortable with the idea. I don't want to intrude on the independent life you've built for yourself." Victoria was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the implications of having her father nearby after 2 years of carefully maintained distance. "I think it could work," she said finally. "We're not the same people we were when I left Connecticut. Maybe we can have a different kind of relationship now." The move to California represented a new beginning for both of us. I sold the house in Riverside Heights, which still carried too many memories of federal investigations and midnight fires, and used the proceeds to purchase a small apartment near Stanford's campus. The basement workshop was replaced by a properly equipped laboratory where I could conduct research and teach students without worrying about the legal implications of my activities. Victoria and I developed a routine of weekly dinners where we discussed our respective projects and gradually rebuilt the trust that had been damaged by my deception and the chaos that followed. She shared her progress on portable medical device designs, while I described the policy research I was conducting with Stanford's health economics faculty. "Dad, I want to show you something," Victoria said during one of our dinners, pulling out her laptop to display her latest project. "I've been working on a modular dialysis system that can be assembled from components manufactured in different countries, reducing costs while maintaining safety standards." The device she had designed incorporated many of the principles I had discovered through trial and error while refurbishing equipment in my basement. But Victoria's approach was sophisticated and systematic, involving collaboration with nephrologists, manufacturing engineers, and regulatory specialists who ensured that her innovations would meet all safety and effectiveness requirements. "This is remarkable, Victoria. You're solving problems that would have taken me years to figure out on my own." She smiled with satisfaction.
I had a good teacher, even if his methods were questionable. You taught me to look at medical equipment as tools for helping people rather than just complex machines. That perspective has been crucial to my success as an engineer. Victoria's research caught the attention of the Gates Foundation, which awarded her a fellowship to develop and test her modular dialysis system in partnership with clinics in developing countries. The project would require extensive travel and collaboration with healthcare workers in environments where resource limitations demanded creative solutions to complex medical challenges. "I'm nervous about working in places where the infrastructure is so different from what I'm used to," Victoria admitted as she prepared for her first field deployment to a clinic in rural Kenya. "What if my designs don't work in real-world conditions? What if I haven't considered factors that seem obvious to people who actually live in these communities?" "The fact that you're asking those questions suggests you'll do fine," I assured her. "Your mother always said that the best engineers are the ones who listen more than they talk, especially when working in unfamiliar environments." Victoria's fieldwork in Kenya exceeded everyone's expectations. Her modular dialysis system not only functioned effectively in resource-limited settings, but was adapted by local technicians in ways that improved its performance and reduced maintenance requirements. The collaboration between Stanford engineering students and Kenyan healthcare workers created innovations that neither group could have developed independently. "Dad, you need to see this," Victoria said excitedly during our video call after her first month in Kenya. "The technicians here have modified my design to use locally manufactured components that are actually superior to some of the parts I specified. They've been maintaining medical equipment for years with whatever materials they could find, so they understand things about durability and repair that I never learned in school." Her enthusiasm reminded me of my own excitement when I had first discovered that discarded medical equipment could be restored to functional condition. But Victoria was experiencing that satisfaction within a framework of collaboration and mutual respect that my solitary basement work had never provided. The success of Victoria's field research led to additional opportunities for international development work. She was invited to join a multi-university consortium focused on sustainable healthcare technology for underserved populations, a position that would allow her to continue developing innovative medical devices while building partnerships between American universities and healthcare institutions in developing countries. "I think this is what I'm meant to do with my life," Victoria told me during her brief return to California between field deployments. "Not just designing medical equipment, but creating systems that help communities solve their own healthcare challenges using resources they can access and maintain independently." Her sense of purpose and direction reminded me of her mother's dedication to nursing, but with a global perspective that reflected the opportunities available to her generation. Victoria was building exactly the kind of meaningful career that Sarah and I had hoped for her, contributing to solutions for healthcare access disparities that affected millions of people worldwide. Meanwhile, my work at Stanford evolved beyond teaching into research collaborations that examined the intersection of technology, policy, and healthcare delivery. I published papers on equipment lifecycle management and testified before congressional committees about the potential for technology redistribution to supplement traditional healthcare funding mechanisms. The academic environment provided intellectual stimulation that I had never experienced during my years as a security guard, but it also offered perspective on how individual actions fit into larger systems of social change. My criminal theft of medical equipment had accidentally exposed institutional fraud, but it had taken years of legal collaboration to translate that discovery into sustainable policy reforms. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been following your work on medical equipment redistribution policy," said Dr. Michael Roberts, a health economist who had invited me to collaborate on a comprehensive study of healthcare resource allocation. "Your practical experience provides insights that pure academic research often misses." Dr. Roberts and I spent months analyzing data from hospitals across the country, documenting patterns of equipment replacement and disposal that suggested systematic waste of functional medical devices. Our research revealed that American hospitals discarded or stored over $2 billion worth of usable medical equipment annually, while clinics serving underserved populations struggled with outdated or inadequate technology. "The irony is staggering," Dr. Roberts observed as we reviewed our findings. "We have a healthcare system that simultaneously suffers from resource scarcity and resource waste, often within the same institution." Our research attracted attention from healthcare administrators who were looking for ways to reduce costs while improving patient care. We developed protocols that hospitals could use to evaluate equipment for potential redistribution before disposing of functional devices, creating revenue streams that supported both equipment donors and recipient organizations. The success of our academic collaboration led to consulting opportunities with major healthcare systems that wanted to implement equipment redistribution programs. I found myself advising the same types of institutions I had once stolen from, helping them develop legal and sustainable alternatives to the waste I had discovered during my security guard rounds. 5 years after my arrest, I received an unexpected call from Eleanor Hendricks' granddaughter, Sarah Hendricks Williams, who had become a healthcare policy analyst following her grandmother's death. Eleanor had lived 3 additional years beyond her original prognosis, long enough to see not only her granddaughter's wedding, but also the birth of her first great-grandchild. "Mr. Sullivan, I wanted you to know that Grandma Eleanor left specific instructions for me to contact you," Sarah explained during our phone conversation. "She wanted to thank you again for giving her those extra years with our family, but she also wanted to make sure you understood how your actions affected other people beyond just the patients you helped directly." Sarah went on to explain that Eleanor had used her extended life to establish a foundation focused on improving healthcare access for elderly patients who couldn't afford necessary medical equipment. The foundation had provided over 1,000 pieces of refurbished medical equipment to patients throughout New England, all through legal channels that Eleanor had spent years learning to navigate.
Grandma always said that you taught her there was no excuse for accepting preventable suffering when solutions existed. But she also said that good intentions needed to be combined with sustainable methods if they were going to create lasting change. Eleanor's Foundation had become exactly the kind of organization I should have researched and supported instead of operating my illegal redistribution network. Her legal approach had helped more patients over 5 years than my criminal activities had assisted during 18 months without the collateral damage that had nearly destroyed my family. Sarah, I wish I had known about your grandmother's foundation when I was struggling with how to help patients who couldn't access needed equipment. I might have made very different choices if I had understood there were legal alternatives to what I was attempting. That's actually why I'm calling, Sarah replied. The Foundation Board wants to invite you to serve as our technical consultant. We need someone who understands both the engineering challenges of equipment refurbishment and the policy frameworks required for sustainable redistribution programs. The opportunity to work with Eleanor's Foundation felt like completing a circle that had begun with my theft of the dialysis machine that extended her life. But instead of operating alone in my basement workshop, I would be collaborating with legal experts, medical professionals, and community health advocates who shared my commitment to improving healthcare access through practical action. Victoria returned from her latest field deployment just as I was beginning my work with Eleanor's Foundation. Her research in Southeast Asia had resulted in breakthrough innovations in portable medical device design, and she had been offered a permanent position with Doctors Without Borders that would allow her to continue developing healthcare technology solutions for humanitarian crisis situations. Dad, I've been thinking about something, Victoria said as we walked through Stanford's campus during her brief stay in California. All these years, I've been focused on building my own identity separate from the chaos that your actions created in our family. But I'm starting to realize that my passion for humanitarian engineering probably comes from watching you try to help people, even if your methods were flawed. Her observation surprised me because I assumed Victoria's career interests were influenced primarily by her mother's dedication to healthcare rather than my criminal behavior. I never thought about my actions as inspiring your work. I was too focused on the damage I had caused. The damage was real, and it changed both our lives permanently, Victoria acknowledged. But so was the example you set about caring enough to take personal risks when other people needed help. I just learned to channel that impulse through legal and sustainable methods. We discussed her job offer with Doctors Without Borders, which would require her to spend most of her time in regions affected by conflict, natural disasters, or extreme poverty. The work would be challenging and potentially dangerous, but it would also allow her to apply her engineering skills to problems that affected millions of people who had been abandoned by conventional healthcare systems. Are you concerned about the risks involved in humanitarian work? I asked. Victoria considered the question seriously. I'm concerned about many things, but not enough to avoid work that feels meaningful. Mom always said that the safest choice isn't always the right choice, especially when you have skills that could help people who don't have other options. Her reference to Sarah's philosophy reminded me of conversations we had shared during our college years about the balance between personal security and social responsibility.
Sarah had chosen nursing, despite better-paying career alternatives, because she believed healthcare was a fundamental human right that required personal commitment from people with relevant skills. Your mother would be incredibly proud of the person you've become, I said. You found ways to honor her values while building a career that's uniquely your own. Victoria accepted the position with Doctors Without Borders, beginning a career that would take her to refugee camps, disaster zones, and remote clinics, where her portable medical device innovations could provide life-saving care to people who had no access to conventional healthcare infrastructure. Her work represented the best possible outcome of the values Sarah and I had tried to instill in her, even if the path to that outcome had been more complicated than any of us could have anticipated. Meanwhile, my collaboration with Eleanor's Foundation evolved into a comprehensive program that partnered with hospitals, medical device manufacturers, and community health organizations to create sustainable systems for equipment redistribution. We developed standardized protocols for equipment evaluation, refurbishment training programs for community technicians, and tracking systems that ensured donated devices reached patients who truly needed them. The Foundation's success represented everything I'd hoped to accomplish through my illegal basement operation, but achieved through collaboration rather than theft, transparency rather than deception, and sustainable systems rather than individual heroism. The irony wasn't lost on me that my criminal behavior had ultimately led to legal solutions that were far more effective than anything I could have achieved on my own. 10 years after my arrest, Victoria and I attended a ceremony honoring Eleanor Hendricks' contributions to healthcare access reform. The foundation she had established using her extended life had grown into a national organization that coordinated medical equipment redistribution programs in 43 states, helping over 50,000 patients access necessary medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. "Dad, do you think Mom would have approved of how everything turned out?" Victoria asked as we listened to speakers describe the foundation's impact on healthcare access for underserved populations. I thought about Sarah's dedication to helping patients within institutional frameworks, her belief in working for change through proper channels, her commitment to honesty and transparency in all her professional relationships. My criminal shortcuts had ultimately led to positive outcomes, but only after causing tremendous damage to the people I loved most. "I think your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished and grateful that something good came from all the mistakes I made," I replied. "But I also think she would want me to acknowledge that there were legal ways to achieve the same goals if I had been patient enough to find them." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the real lesson from everything that happened. Good intentions matter, but they're not sufficient. Methods matter too, especially when other people will be affected by the consequences of your choices." As the ceremony concluded, I reflected on the complex legacy of my decision to steal medical equipment in order to help patients who couldn't access proper health care. My actions exposed institutional fraud, led to policy reforms, and inspired my daughter to pursue a career in humanitarian engineering. But they had also destroyed our family's stability, endangered Victoria's safety, and demonstrated the arrogance of believing that individual judgment could replace collaborative problem-solving. The most important outcome was Victoria's transformation into someone who combined compassionate motivation with practical wisdom, someone who understood that helping people required more than good intentions and technical skills. She had learned to work within systems while pushing for change, to build partnerships rather than operating alone, to consider long-term consequences rather than focusing solely on immediate needs. Victoria's work with Doctors Without Borders took her to refugee camps in Syria, earthquake recovery zones in Nepal, and epidemic response efforts in West Africa. Her portable medical device innovations saved lives in conditions where conventional healthcare infrastructure had collapsed, providing exactly the kind of emergency medical support that humanitarian organizations desperately needed. "Dad, I wanted to share something with you," Victoria said during one of our video calls while she was working in a refugee camp on the Syrian border. "The dialysis system I designed based on your refurbishment principles is being manufactured by a company in Jordan that employs Syrian refugees. We're creating jobs for displaced people while producing medical equipment that serves their communities." Her integration of humanitarian technology development with economic empowerment represented a sophistication in thinking about social change that far exceeded anything I had achieved through my individual efforts. Victoria had learned to consider not just immediate medical needs, but also the broader systems required to create sustainable solutions to healthcare access problems. The success of Victoria's work led to recognition from international development organizations, medical device manufacturers, and academic institutions that were interested in her approaches to humanitarian engineering. She was invited to establish a new research center focused on crisis healthcare technology, a position that would allow her to train the next generation of engineers while continuing her fieldwork in emergency response situations. "I'm excited about the opportunity, but I'm also nervous about taking on so much responsibility," Victoria admitted during her visit to California to discuss the research center position. "What if I can't live up to the expectations people have based on my current work?" "Your mother always said that the people best qualified for leadership positions are the ones who worry about whether they're ready for the responsibility. The fact that you're asking that question suggests you'll approach the role with the humility and seriousness it deserves." Victoria accepted the position, establishing the International Center for Humanitarian Engineering Technology at a consortium of universities that included Stanford, MIT, and Johns Hopkins. The center brought together engineering students, medical professionals, and humanitarian workers to develop innovative solutions for healthcare challenges and crisis situations. Meanwhile, my work with Eleanor's foundation evolved into a comprehensive program that served as a national model for medical equipment redistribution. We had documented cost savings of over $200 million for healthcare systems that implemented our protocols, while improving access to medical care for hundreds of thousands of patients who couldn't afford conventional treatment options. Mr. Sullivan, the preliminary results from our pilot programs are extraordinary, reported Foundation Director Jennifer Walsh during one of our quarterly board meetings. We've redistributed medical equipment worth over $8 million at less than 10% of the original purchase cost, while maintaining safety and effectiveness standards that exceed FDA requirements. The Foundation's success represented everything I had hoped to accomplish through my illegal basement operation, but achieved through collaboration rather than theft, transparency rather than deception, and sustainable systems rather than individual heroism. The irony wasn't lost on me that my criminal behavior had ultimately led to legal solutions that were far more effective than anything I could have achieved on my own. 20 years after my arrest, Victoria and I attended a ceremony honoring Eleanor Hendricks' contributions to healthcare access reform. The foundation she had established using her extended life had grown into a national organization that coordinated medical equipment redistribution programs in 43 states, helping over 50,000 patients access necessary medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. "Dad, do you think Mom would have approved of how everything turned out?" Victoria asked as we listened to speakers describe the foundation's impact on healthcare access for underserved populations. I thought about Sarah's dedication to helping patients within institutional frameworks, her belief in working for change through proper channels, her commitment to honesty and transparency in all her professional relationships. My criminal shortcuts had ultimately led to positive outcomes, but only after causing tremendous damage to the people I loved most. "I think your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished and grateful that something good came from all the mistakes I made," I replied. "But I also think she would want me to acknowledge that there were legal ways to achieve the same goals, if I had been patient enough to find them." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the real lesson from everything that happened. Good intentions matter, but they're not sufficient. Methods matter too, especially when other people will be affected by the consequences of your choices." As the ceremony concluded, I reflected on the complex legacy of my decision to steal medical equipment in order to help patients who couldn't access proper health care. My actions exposed institutional fraud, led to policy reforms, and inspired my daughter to pursue a career in humanitarian engineering. But they had also destroyed our family's stability, endangered Victoria's safety, and demonstrated the arrogance of believing that individual judgment could replace collaborative problem-solving. The most important outcome was Victoria's transformation into someone who combined compassionate motivation with practical wisdom, someone who understood that helping people required more than good intentions and technical skills. She had learned to work within systems while pushing for change, to build partnerships rather than operating alone, to consider long-term consequences rather than focusing solely on immediate needs. Victoria's work with Doctors Without Borders took her to refugee camps in Syria, earthquake recovery zones in Nepal, and epidemic response efforts in West Africa. Her portable medical device innovations saved lives in conditions where conventional healthcare infrastructure had collapsed, providing exactly the kind of emergency medical support that humanitarian organizations desperately needed. "Dad, I wanted to share something with you," Victoria said during one of our video calls while she was working in a refugee camp on the Syrian border. "The dialysis system I designed based on your refurbishment principles is being manufactured by a company in Jordan that employs Syrian refugees. We're creating jobs for displaced people while producing medical equipment that serves their communities." Her integration of humanitarian technology development with economic empowerment represented a sophistication in thinking about social change that far exceeded anything I had achieved through my individual efforts. Victoria had learned to consider not just immediate medical needs, but also the broader systems required to create sustainable solutions to healthcare access problems. The success of Victoria's work led to recognition from international development organizations, medical device manufacturers, and academic institutions that were interested in her approaches to humanitarian engineering. She was invited to establish a new research center focused on crisis healthcare technology, a position that would allow her to train the next generation of engineers while continuing her fieldwork in emergency response